There are silences in history that echo louder than words. One such silence surrounds the most influential figure in Western civilization, Jesus of Nazareth. What happened to him between the ages of 12 and 30? Why do the Gospels speak of his birth, a remarkable episode in the temple at age 12, and then leap directly to his baptism in the Jordan River, already an adult, ready to begin his ministry? This is not a mere detail overlooked by ancient authors. It's a gap of 18 years, time enough for a seeking soul to traverse entire worlds in search of truth. Why is this period absent from the official accounts? Why do we know nothing of the youth of a man who, upon emerging, taught with a wisdom and authority that left even the most learned in silence? What you are about to hear is not empty speculation. It is a web of historical evidence, ancient accounts, suppressed traditions, and profound spiritual connections that point to a path Jesus may have followed. What if, during this time, he had traveled along ancient trade routes to the east? What if he had studied with Buddhist monks in the Himalayas, learned from Hindu sages on the banks of the Ganges, or been initiated into the mysteries of ancient Egypt? We are not talking about a modern myth. In the early centuries of Christianity, various Gospels and texts circulated that addressed the so-called hidden years of Jesus. Texts such as the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, the Arabic Infancy Gospel, and other apocryphal documents provided details about his youth. In many of them, Jesus traveled, learned, and taught. But these accounts were rejected and banned at the Council of Nicaea in 325, when Emperor Constantine oversaw the standardization of the Christian faith. What did not fit the desired narrative was erased. And what was in these texts, stories of a young man who crossed deserts and mountain ranges, who learned meditation, energy healing, and the secrets of the spiritual nature of humanity. Stories that positioned Jesus as part of a universal lineage of masters, not as an isolated exception created solely within the Jewish tradition. But what about the evidence? Are there sources outside the Christian tradition that support this possibility? Yes, and they are astonishing. In 1887, a Russian journalist and explorer named Nicholas Notovich published an explosive account. He claimed to have found, in the Hemis monastery in Ladakh, northern India, manuscripts that spoke of a sage from the west named Issa, who had lived there between the ages of 14 and 29. These texts described how Issa learned from Buddhist and Hindu masters, traveled through Nepal, studied the Vedas, and even confronted local religious authorities. After that, he returned to the West to fulfill his mission. Notovich was discredited by some, but years later, scholars like Swami Abhedananda and Nicholas Roerich claimed to have seen the same manuscripts. Coincidence? Or evidence of a buried truth? More than documents, Jesus' own teachings reveal striking parallels with Eastern spiritual traditions. Love for enemies, unconditional forgiveness, detachment from material possessions, the search for the kingdom of God within you. All of these find echoes in the words of the Buddha, in Vedic scriptures, and in the concepts of the Tao. Jesus frequently used the expression Son of Man, translated from the Aramaic Bar Nasha, a term also used in Aramaic Buddhist texts from northern India to describe an enlightened being, someone who had transcended ordinary human existence. His phrase, "I am the way," recalls the Tao, the way of the Chinese tradition. His method of teaching through parables, mental challenges, and apparent contradictions resembles Zen Buddhist koans. His call for the disciple to be born again evokes the initiations of Egyptian mysteries, where the initiate symbolically died to be reborn as a spiritual being. Speaking of Egypt, it also plays a mysterious role in this story. The Gospel of Matthew recounts that the Holy Family fled to Egypt when Jesus was a baby, but it does not say when or how they returned. What happened during this period? At that time, Egypt was a center of esoteric knowledge. Alexandria, in particular, was home to mystery schools, libraries, Gnostic masters, and therapeuti, a mystical Jewish sect that practiced healing, fasting, meditation, and advanced spiritual teachings. Could Jesus, as a young man, have returned to Egypt to drink from this source? There are also local traditions that point to his presence in the East. In the Kashmir Valley, there is a tomb called Roza Bal, attributed for centuries to a prophet from the West named Uz Asaf. Some scholars interpret this name as a variation of Jesus the Gatherer. The tomb has Jewish characteristics, such as the east-west burial orientation, unlike Islamic tombs. Even more intriguing is the degree of spiritual maturity Jesus demonstrates at age 30. When he emerges to be baptized by John, he already speaks with authority, performs healings, and challenges Pharisees and crowds with words that seem to condense millennia of wisdom. The religious leaders themselves ask, where did he get such wisdom if he never studied among us? The answer may lie in what he experienced in silence, in retreats in Himalayan caves, in nighttime lessons under the stars of India, in Egyptian temples where the spirit met the eternal. Acknowledging this does not diminish Jesus. On the contrary, it amplifies his greatness. It reveals him as a universal seeker, a synthesizer of eternal truths, someone who walked the deepest paths of human spirituality and brought back the distilled essence of all he saw. This new perspective invites us to look beyond religious boundaries, to recognize that spiritual truth is not the monopoly of one tradition, but a river that flows through many banks. If Jesus drank from these waters, why can't we? Perhaps in meditating, practicing compassion, or studying parables and Eastern teachings, we are following the same steps of that mysterious young man who disappeared from the Gospels but left traces of light across the ancient world. By examining Jesus' teachings in light of these possible Eastern influences, we realize it's not just about finding philosophical parallels, but identifying deep patterns of spiritual integration. It's not as if he copied Eastern teachings, but as if he absorbed their essence and transmuted it into a language his people could understand. The Sermon on the Mount, for example, reveals a wisdom that surpasses the limits of Jewish jurisprudence of the time. In it, Jesus does not merely interpret the Torah, he transcends it. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This phrase strongly resonates with the principles of humility in Buddhism, emptiness in Zen, and detachment in Taoism. The idea that true spirituality arises from inner emptiness is a concept deeply present in Eastern traditions. But how would he have reached these conclusions if he never left Galilee? The most plausible answer is, he did leave, but his journey was carefully removed from the official history. There is evidence that early Christians were aware of these connections. Many early Gnostic groups, considered heretical by the later church, spoke of Jesus as a master who had received secret teachings, including in Egypt and beyond. The Essenes, a mystical Jewish group active during Jesus' time, already practiced fasting, communal living, meditation, and a form of energy healing very similar to what he would use. Jesus' relationship with the Essenes is still debated, but there are strong indications that he had direct contact with them. Another striking point is the way Jesus performed his healings. He often touched the sick, laid hands on them, spoke of faith, and expelled impure energies. These practices align with energy healing techniques found in Indian Ayurveda and Tibetan traditions. The idea that the recipient's faith activates the healing process is central to both Jesus' ministry and Eastern spiritual medicines. Furthermore, Jesus' lifestyle, as described in the Gospels, bears striking similarities to Hindu sannyasins and Buddhist bhikkhus. He was an itinerant master, detached from material possessions, often retreating to pray alone in the mountains or desert. He taught in parables, like the Buddha, and often answered questions with questions in a Socratic and Zen-like style. In the linguistic realm, there are intriguing clues. The term kingdom of heaven, used repeatedly by Jesus, does not appear in this form in the Judaism of the time, but it is conceptually linked to the Vedic notion of moksha, spiritual liberation, and Buddhist nirvana. The search is not for a geographical place, but for an inner state of awakened consciousness. And what about Jesus' famous "I am"? When he says, "Before Abraham was, I am," it directly echoes the language used in Egyptian mystery schools, which spoke of "I am that I am" as an expression of the eternal divinity dwelling in every being. At the same time, his ability to unite seemingly opposing spiritual truths shows a mind trained in synthesis, not exclusivity. He said, "Be gentle as doves and wise as serpents," a balance of opposing forces like the Chinese yin-yang. Rather than a tribal master, Jesus seems to have been shaped to be a universal instructor. But why would the church exclude all this? The answer lies in the spiritual politics of the early centuries. When Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, there was a strategic need to present Jesus as unique, absolute, separate from all other traditions. This served not only theology, but the centralization of power and authority. A Jesus who had learned from Hindus, Buddhists, Taoists, or Egyptian mystics threatened the project of exclusivity and spiritual supremacy. Thus, many texts that spoke of his youth and possible travels were labeled apocryphal, destroyed, or forgotten. This intentional historical editing shaped how the Western world understands spirituality to this day, as if there were only one path, one truth, one religion. Yet Jesus himself never claimed this in institutional terms. When he says, "No one comes to the Father except through me," he may be speaking of the Christ consciousness, the state of inner unity, and not an organized religion. Perhaps he was saying, "Only by awakening the Christ within will you reach divinity." This perspective transforms the figure of Jesus. From the founder of an institution, he becomes a master of awakening, a guide who crossed cultures, absorbed wisdoms, and returned to the world a distilled, pure message, adapted to his people, but universal in its essence. And what does this mean for us today? It means we can set aside the fear of exploring other traditions. We can see Zen as part of Jesus' path. We can practice yoga or meditation without betraying our Christian faith. We can understand that perhaps Jesus himself walked these roads, sat with monks, pondered the sutras, contemplated the Upanishads. It means there is freedom, freedom to grow spiritually beyond dogmatic barriers, freedom to integrate universal wisdom in light of inner experience. And more, it means that true spirituality is interconnected, that all great traditions are, in fact, different windows to the same light. What changes is the frame, the language, the culture. But the sun shining behind is the same. Jesus, the man who disappeared for 18 years, may have been the spiritual traveler the world needed. Someone who saw unity where we only saw division. Someone who lived synthesis before we even knew it was possible. And if he did this, we can too. We can explore, integrate, open our eyes. We can read the Dhammapada and the Gospels side by side. We can realize that the kingdom of God is within you is the same as Tattvam Asi, you are that. Imagine a spirituality that does not separate but unites. Imagine a world where the compassion of Buddhism, the wisdom of the Vedas, the light of Egyptian mysteries, and the unconditional love of Jesus are threads of the same fabric. This is the spirituality that Jesus may have known, and that can transform your life as well. If Jesus' hidden years were indeed an initiatory journey through various sacred traditions, then his words carry more than doctrine. They bear the living memory of a soul that walked many paths in search of truth. And that truth is now knocking at your door. If this video touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and share this message. Together, we can rediscover the universal spirituality that Jesus revealed to the world. May the light of truth guide your steps until the next revelation.